I note with interest what you're saying, Mr. Burgess. Don't you think that the banks have a social responsibility? You know, after all, their debt was socialised. That caused the whole collapse of the economy. And I think in terms of the narrow way that you're looking at it, in terms of non-performing loans and GDP to credit ratios and all of that, like in such an abstract way, at the end of the day, it was these private banks, followed on then by the vulture funds, that caused all of that. Do they not now have a social responsibility to come to an agreement with people who are trying to pay?
I agree with you. Yes, they do. Absolutely, they do. The banks have a social responsibility. It's very clear. I mean, David gave the figures. I think he said he had 8,000 customers. 90% of them have stayed in their homes. And that is, roughly speaking, the figure. I would imagine David's is a bit higher than for ordinary people going into their banks. But the banks reschedule around 90% of the homes. The banks show extraordinary forbearance. And that's one of the problems with the vulture funds. I mean, people tend to be critical of the banks, but they have restructured 90% of loans, and I think if loans are sold to vulture funds, they are less likely to get a restructuring. But back to your thing, do the banks have a social responsibility? Yes, and I think they show that. They take legal action as a last resort, although different banks have different strategies. They take legal action as a last resort, and it's only really when people are paying nothing that they take that legal reaction. They take that legal action. Okay,
I'm really concerned about the fact of throwing out 10,000 people there who don't engage to get a headline figure to set a narrative on. Because absolutely, I don't agree with somebody who can afford to pay a mortgage while I pay my mortgage, as somebody doesn't pay it. For people who can't afford it. So let's take that off the table, because that's not what we're talking about here, is people who won't engage. I have numerous people who have tried to engage with their banks and engage with vulture funds. They are put from Dublin to Belfast and all over the place. They will not engage. They will not engage. So in working out, and I have worked out the household accounts and all that with people to see what they can afford. And it comes down to what's spent on the child's birthday present or the communion or all of that. And they're trying to pull back here and pull back here. And the banks are coming back, and the banks and the vulture funds say, no, that's not good enough. So that's the incidences, if you like, on where the banks won't engage or the vulture funds won't engage. Those people are trying, and those people are saying, so say if the mortgage was just say 500, which wouldn't be, but so we can pay 300 a month for that. And the banks are saying, no, we need the whole 500.
Okay, this comes back to a question that Deputy Doherty asked David. What happens if the bank classifies your loan as unsustainable? How do you encourage them to pay? I have an article written on my website, what to do if the bank classifies your mortgage as unsustainable. And I'm very, very clear. If your mortgage repayment should be 500 and you can pay and you do pay 300, there isn't a hope in hell of the bank or the vulture fund getting an order for possession unless things change dramatically in this country. So I recommend to people, pay what you can, go into the court, tell the registrar, it's usually in front of a registrar or rather than a judge, tell the registrar the story, and an awful lot of cases are actually, they're brought to court. The vast majority of cases before the court, there's probably about 10,000 of them there now, they get struck out. So the reality of the situation is pay what you can. This to me is the best advice if you want to advise individuals. Yes. It is, and I've also said in my paper that banks should be stopped from taking legal action against people where they are paying, and I'm saying 3% of the outstanding balance or whatever. So I actually genuinely want to protect the people who are paying, and if people can't pay and they want to make an effort, I want to see a mortgage assistance payment for them. But it's the small minority of people who are not paying, who could pay, who are being used by the banks as an excuse to charge the other 300,000 people the highest mortgage rates in Europe.
But that's why coming out with a figure of 10,000 without solidly having that, I think fits in. It's, you know, it's almost like that the whole fault of the insurance company, for instance, is people who have accidents and they have to claim. You know, it's just setting that narrative that would really worry me, and I don't think that should be done, because the reason why we have the court cases and all of that, I've been to the courts. You told us to go to court. I go to the courts and I see what happens, and I see banks and vulture funds refusing, where, you know, within a small amount of refusing to take offers, you know, and the banks refusing to take offers from people to buy out their debt, yet they will sell that very same debt to a vulture fund for an awful lot less. Can you explain to me why they do that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I hear that David's mortgage is 300,000 and he's bought it out for 200,000, yeah, I'm going to stop paying my mortgage and I'm going to try and get the same deal. It's as simple as that. If I hear that David's mortgage has been sold to a vulture fund, I'd be very sorry for him. So it's perfectly reasonable for the banks not to write off debt for somebody who retains ownership of their home. It's absolutely the right thing to do, and I would balance that by saying that anybody who loses their family home or surrenders their family home should have the shortfall written off.
So it's the right thing to do for them to sell that off for less than they would allow the person to stay in their own home to buy it, and then to sell it to the vulture fund, who at the end of the day, we have to remember, doesn't have to pay any tax on this, or just a minimal amount of tax.
It depends on the structure.
On the profits for the vulture funds. The vulture funds don't pay their share of tax in this country.
Yeah, well, I would disagree with that as well. I mean, the vulture fund should pay tax, but that's, yeah, I mean, that's a.
But you see, I think if we compartmentalise everything, then we are not getting a picture here of what needs to be done in terms of homelessness, housing, fairness and justice for people to keep them in their own homes, people who are willing to pay whatever they can afford to pay. I just maybe want to ask, just maybe if Mr. Hall would just comment on that around the two things of why banks are choosing to sell to vulture funds rather than to do a restructuring with the person.
Yes, Senator. So part of the problem here is actually the central bank. The central bank set the rules in relation to what the banks are allowed to restructure. The central bank has shown minimum flexibility in relation to allowing the banks to restructure loans. They wouldn't understand. You'd have to send them a dictionary to understand the word radical. They'd have to look it up. They wouldn't understand it. The central bank wouldn't understand it, and you know, that therein lies the problem. The banks are actually completely controlled in what they're allowed to do by the central bank, and many an occasion, you know, you can have a go at a bank and be in dispute with a bank around similar circumstances to what you mentioned about people that have approached you in courts, where there's a small differential between where they can be salvaged and where they can't be salvaged, and they will not accept it. The mistake being made by many people is, and part of back to Deputy Doherty's question about people engaging, is this is not an a la carte normal negotiation that people engage in. This is a prescribed production line, prescribed by the central bank in an inhumane, callous manner that is governed by a code that is an administrative process designed to tick some boxes, not provide solutions. So many, 33% of those people who are in the 119,000 that have been restructured are capitalising the arrears. That's just adding it on and elongating it. So the challenge here is that you know, and I know Brendan's mentioned about the interest rates, like being the highest in Europe. Like AIB's not doing too badly with the high interest rates, having made 1.6 billion last year. So I don't respectfully suggest that means they'll make a bit more money if we decide to throw out a couple of thousand people on the street. And it is all relevant. There is a social responsibility, to answer your question, upon banks. Banks, by their mere existence today, are there at our behest, having pumped billions. I don't know if we've got amnesia. I know that dementia is rampant throughout the country, but we have a big problem. We have a big problem with people forgetting. We pumped billions into these banks. And they have a social responsibility. But one point Brendan's mentioned is correct, and that is there is an obsession within banks in relation to ensuring that nobody is seen to get a deal where somebody else might decide to voluntarily stop making payments.
I think that I want to get into the vulture funds just for a minute, in terms of, I'm absolutely disgusted that the vulture funds have refused invitation after invitation to come before this committee. And I want to ask each of you, If the vulture funds have nothing to hide, and you're saying, well, you can do or it's been said that you can do a restructuring with them, and they have more flexibility because of the servicing agent, and they're not ruled by the central bank and all of that, so they have more flexibility to negotiate. Why do you think the vulture funds won't come before this Finance Oireachtas Committee?
Well, I think, firstly, there's no flexibility. That's a myth.
Yes.
That's a spin. That's just pure, blatant PR. One of the funds, Mars Capital, has evolved over the last number of months and has started to introduce some of the restructures that are similar to the banks, which is welcomed. But ultimately, a vulture fund doesn't provide any restructuring solutions. So this myth of they'll write off debt and you can sit down and have a chat with them and isn't it great? That's rubbish. Yeah. That's blatantly rubbish and peddled by banks, peddled by vulture lovers and peddled by vultures. And they won't come in, Senator, because they can't tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And by the way, they've done nothing wrong. Let's be clear. The vultures have done nothing wrong. They get a red carpet rolled out, they're brought in, and a state-owned bank gave them the first cut at the marketplace. They gave them the first cut at the marketplace, brought them in and said, hello lads, would you like a free gig? And here, our state-owned bank. What chance had people got to engage if they thought they were going to be sold on? So vultures have done nothing wrong. They're feasting on the carcasses of debtors. It is a policy of government to outsource dirty work.
Yeah.
And vultures are the ones who do the repossessions.
Yeah. I just wonder, why do you think they won't? If they have nothing to hide, why won't they come before this committee, Mr. Burgess?
I have to be careful how I say this, but most people would perceive that this is what's the word, a chamber, a star chamber, is that the expression? And that you wouldn't listen to any sort of reason at all, and you'd just be grandstanding and taking shots at them, and you wouldn't listen to what they were saying, and if anything they said, you'd contradict them.
Okay.
Sorry.
So sorry, just one second. So yeah, do you agree with that? That we're just so unreasonable, and we would be so unreasonable to vulture funds?
In a lot of cases, I have to be honest, I've seen the hearings here on various different issues where I've seen people just like people being attacked, in not just the Oireachtas Finance Committee, but generally speaking, politicians have a go at people, and it's difficult. I mean, you've asked a question, I'm giving you the answer to the question.
Okay.
I would like to see the vulture funds being brought in and being asked to explain in a sort of a backwards and forwards manner. I would like factual information. Well, is it true that you do not capitalise arrears? What solutions do you offer? I would like to see them being asked questions. How many loans have you bought? I'd love to see that data. And, if they were asked to give that, they probably would. But if they're asked to come in here and be told about their social responsibilities to keep people in their houses and why are they not paying tax, that's actually a fair question.
There are very many questions that we would like to ask them, and ask them in public.
I'd love to see them asked as well. But that's why they're not here.
Yeah. If we promise to be gentle with them, do you think they might come in?
Because there's a tendency in all committees that I've watched to is grandstand the word?
There's a tendency to try to get to the truth.
That's the problem.
That is it, and that is the only reason why my colleagues are here, is to get to the truth.
Do you know the questionnaires you send to the banks before they come in every quarter? I wonder, would the vulture funds answer your question? Answer the questionnaire?
I just need to ask you one more question.
Sure.
Do you think that it is reasonable that these vulture funds have access to the Department of Finance, that they're traipsing in and out of here, week after week and month after month, having access to the very heart of our government? Do you think it's right that they have that access, or do you think that access should be stopped until they come out publicly and tell the truth about all of these things?
To be honest with you, that would be that's something I haven't really thought about. I presume the Department of Finance should be meeting with the various different vulture funds and people like that to find out what's happening. But I agree with you. I'd like to see them here, and I would like to see the I'm not making any reference here today, but I would like to see the inquiry system or the committee system operating in a more give us the facts, give us the information type of thing, rather than the grandstanding that I often see.
Well, do you think that the vulture, that the tracker mortgage debacle and scandal would even have been uncovered if it wasn't for the questions that were put here in this Finance Committee? Would you not think that the Finance Committee
on my website we've been highlighting the issue for years, calling on the central bank to deal with it for years, and so I've been aware of that issue for a long time and pushed on that. The reason it has become an issue is, and I pointed this out yesterday at the Permanent TSB AGM, is because the Ombudsman found in favour of these borrowers, and the Permanent TSB went to High Court to appeal the Ombudsman's decision, and then they went to High Court, they went to Supreme Court, and that is what got the central bank going, and you have been a great help, I've no doubt about that, but let's be clear, it was the central bank, it was the Permanent TSB going to the Supreme Court which woke up the central bank.
Okay. So there's nothing to do with hearing the voices
I think
in here of the people who suffered as a result of the whole.
There's an example. You had 4 people, you had 4 borrowers in here, right? And you asked very few factual questions about their cases. You got great publicity. I'm going back to the question you asked. You asked about the effect on them and all that. You never went back and said, tell me what was in your contract. Why did you lose your tracker? What were the issues involved? Go back
because we knew that already, but we wanted to hear the human impact of that scandal. I need to ask you, Mr. Hall, do you think it's right that these vulture funds have direct access to the Department of Finance and to the Minister for Finance when they won't come publicly and sit before?
Absolutely not. And the last count is 65 to 5. So 65 vulture fund visits versus 5 debtor advocacy visits to the Department of Finance. Red carpet. And you know, it is quite bizarre that there's very few other jurisdictions in the world where you're engaged in a procurement process to transact billions of euros that you've got direct access to those who control it. It's very, very odd in other procurement rules that you'd be allowed to have access to people who've got influence over significant shareholdings in 2 big lenders. So it is a bizarre system, it is one that is very unique and is one that is unwelcomed. And you know, those vulture funds, and I will temper my comments by saying they've done actually nothing wrong. To be fair to them, it's quite bizarre. They're despicable. They are a cancer in our society. They shouldn't be here because the banks should have been forced to resolve this stuff themselves. And just in relation to Brendan's point, like, you know, Brendan probably stopped himself at the appropriate time before he went over the cliff in relation to challenging the 4 people who came before this committee. Let's be very clear, that's your job. And those people who are looking today and those people who've had trackers, the tracker debacle and tracker scandal, as it is appropriately called, that's the only language could be used in this House, is despicable. The banks, you know, how they obscured details, how they obscured facts. We went from 3,000 to over 34,000 individuals. And that in itself speaks volumes, and the work the committee has done and those 4 people's appearance here is of huge help. But let's be absolutely clear, this tracker issue is an issue about banks, not about behaviour of our committee or anything else. And therein lies the undercurrent of the behaviour that we're seeing in other parts of the system over the recent weeks in relation to covering stuff up and hiding stuff.